The trusts question from February of 1996 is a very instructive question to have a look at. Here the entire question is dealing with fiduciary liability. And the quick approach is going to be to examine every last thing the fiduciary does and then judge it according to our understanding of the duties of fiduciaries. So take a look at the call of the question. It reads, "Has Sam breached his duties as a trustee? Discuss." Well, I think we can all intuit that the probable answer will be yes. But we obviously are going to have to go in and take a look at exactly what Sam does and examine the possible consequences. We go to the top of the question and we find out about Connie and her 1989 death. She leaves a will that includes a trust, which is both to make Sam the trustee and the beneficiary for life. On his death, the successor trustee is supposed to distribute the corpus outright to the then surviving issue of Connie's predeceased daughter, Deborah. So Sam is not being given essentially a fee simple of the entire estate. I realize that phrase is really from real property. But he is given the responsibility to make sure that there is a corpus to turn over to the residuary beneficiaries. So we see that the trust has a standard clause regarding the trustee's powers, including the power to sell, invest, and manage the trust property. Now we go to paragraph 2. Here we find out about Hercules Corporation, a well-established, successful manufacturing company. It represents 30% of the original trust corpus. They regularly pay generous cash dividends, all of which Sam, as trustee, allocated to income. In 1993, instead of paying a cash dividend, Hercules distributed a dividend of its own stock, which Sam also allocated to income. We're going to have to look at these decisions with a great deal of care. In paragraph 3, we find out about a startup company called Fabulon. They have an IPO for their common stock, and the prospectus makes some significant boasts, including a statement of their intent to distribute most of their earnings as dividends. In paragraph 4, Sam sells the good stock and buys the speculative stock. But he doesn't sell the good stock to the open market. He sells it to his wife at current fair market value. That looks like a breach of the duty of loyalty to me. Then the sale of the stock produces an income which is allocated as income by Sam. Then he uses the balance of the proceeds to purchase the Fabulon stock for the trust. Hercules continues to prosper and do great. Fabulon fails. They go bankrupt and their stock is worthless. Then, once again, we are asked if Sam has breached his duties as trustee. Discuss. Well, here, just as is the case in torts, contracts, or property, before we get to the prayer for relief, we have to establish the theory of liability. So here, up front, I spend a very little time up front establishing the validity of Connie's trust. There really are no facts that say it isn't valid, so I just tie it up quickly and establish validity. Then I get to the fiduciary duties owed by the trustee, Sam. I indicate in the heading that he owes duties of loyalty and care, and then look carefully at how I organize the bulk of the analysis. I do it chronologically, using the facts as an organizing principle. First, I discuss his allocation of cash dividends to income. Then, his allocation of a stock dividend. Thirdly, I examine his sale of the good stock, the Hercules stock, to his wife, which is self-dealing, and then I explain how the Fabulon stock purchase is a breach, and it breaches the fiduciary duty of loyalty and the prudent investor rule. And it also indicates that this trustee failed to diversify. Ultimately, it looks like we're going to find Sam to be in clear breach of his duties as a trustee. Then we focus on the remedies of the beneficiaries. And here there are 3 that come to mind: rescission, restitution, and damages. Now, here, right now, I think we can establish some important lessons that we can derive from this fact pattern. We had a very narrow call of the question. It just said, was there any breaches of duty? And we see that in order to give a clear answer to that question, we've got to add a lot of value to our analysis. We need to discuss the validity of the trust, we need to establish the breaches in great detail, and then we have to at least nod our head toward the remedies that the beneficiaries would be entitled to as a result of the breaches by the trustee. So, now let's take a look at my answer for just a few minutes, and I'll show you a few highlights that you might find instructive. Notice up front, I establish the validity of Connie's trust, and I find a home for quite a few facts from the pattern. I am not merely copying the fact pattern. I'm explaining how the trust is valid and what that implies for the rest of the analysis. Next, I focus on Sam, and I establish his fiduciary duties up front. Here again, I am not going into great depth, but I am connecting the significant facts from the pattern to our analysis in establishing the fiduciary duties of the trustee. Then we get to the bulk of the analysis, and also the most complicated material. It seems to me that establishing the breach is a little more difficult to do under time pressures than one might imagine. There are a couple of fairly tricky issues. First, we consider the allocation of cash dividends. Here, notice that I lead with the facts, and it seems evident that as income beneficiary, Sam is entitled to take all of these dividends for himself. Pursuant to the plain language of the document, he is entitled to them. Now, let's look at his allocation of stock dividends to income. Now here, it seems to me that this is a clear instance of where there is a correct answer. However, I remember well that when the bar was actually grading these papers, some answers that received passing scores had a conclusion that was really opposite to what the law would dictate. It seems evident to me, and you can read the analysis for yourself, that Sam should have allocated the stock dividend to the corpus. Apparently, a fair market can be made for the opposite result, but I think that the answer I present is the correct answer. Next, we focus on Sam's sale of the Hercules stock to his wife. Once again, I lead with the facts and analyze how the facts and the law interact. It's true that he did sell the stock for its fair market value, so he didn't overtly rip off the trust by getting less than fair market value. The problem is that he is taking charge of a valuable asset in order to make a wild speculation. And it's a speculation that proved to fail. Consequently, we establish the breach, and we also focus on the capital gain from the sale of the stock. And this probably is yet another example of breach. It's looting, and this too will be an error. So now let's pause for just a moment. Do you see how we're able to strictly scrutinize every single thing this trustee has done up to this point? That's how you get a clearly passing score for this question. We focus very carefully on everything that the trustee does, and we give it strict scrutiny. You'll see I don't spend a lot of time in this answer reciting the law. And you know what? There isn't that much law to recite. I think I've got all the law in this answer, but where you will pass or fail this fact pattern is in doing the analysis. And I think you'll agree that my analysis of the trustee's breaches is about as careful and meticulous and complete as you could reasonably expect somebody to do in an hour. So, with regard to the purchase of the Fabulon stock, we focus on the duty of loyalty and the prudent investor rule, and also the duty to diversify. You'll notice that way back when we considered remedies, I had a little section on fiduciary duties. And here, the duty to diversify finds a home. And here's how it's tested. Ultimately, I conclude that Sam has breached his fiduciary duties as a trustee. And that means that the beneficiaries are entitled to remedies. And I do think that having a remedies section that goes slightly beyond the call of the question is very appropriate. Now, you'll see I don't waste a huge amount of time on it. This obviously is a question about breach of duty. It's not a remedies question. But do you see how my little section on remedies, focusing on rescission, restitution, and damages, makes a very tidy outcome for this answer. Not only do I establish the breach, but I indicate that Deborah's issue ought to be able to set aside this, I can basically call it a fraudulent sale of the Hercules stock to the trustee's wife. Not only that, a restitutionary order, maybe even via a constructive trust, would be appropriate here. And then ultimately, to the extent that the trustee's actions have damaged the trust, then, again, Deborah's issue should be able to step forward and establish damages to make them whole as a result of the trustee's breaches. So, here again, we see that in order to have a theory of liability, whenever you have a theory of liability, implicit in that there's a prayer for relief. And I think it's always appropriate to present at least a little discussion about what the successful litigants will win after their success.